Welcome in, everyone. It's NFL Week 2, and we have a little bit of information to go off of now with 1 week of NFL action in the books. So we have a little bit of info to consider as we look ahead to our Week 2 picks. Now, last week, I just dipped my toes in the water. At one parlay, there was 4 different outcomes in there, and we came very close, going 3-1, only losing because Pittsburgh decided to pull a complete no-show, even being teased up with many points. So this week, with a little more info to go off, I have 2 different parlays, plus some other Monday Night Football thoughts, as we have 2 games going down on Monday. Now, before I get into it, just please take a moment, give this video a like, and hit that subscribe button so you can see more NFL picks and picks from other sports all year long. Now, these parlays that I'm making, they are done at Bet365. I realize maybe not all the props are available in every different book, but I like to mix and match some winners, some scoring props, some teasers, and alternate spreads to try to make some very, at least simple-looking parlays to try to hit on an NFL Sunday. As we all know, betting on the NFL can be very tough, so I'm trying to simplify this as much as I can. To start off, the first parlay I want to go with is the Ravens and the Bengals. Now, the Ravens came away with a Week 1 win, 25-9 at home to the Texans in Week 1, but they were only up 7-6 at the half, and it didn't come without a loss. Starting running back J.K. Dobbins went down with an Achilles injury. Tight end Mark Andrews already missed Week 1, and he is still questionable, but the other injuries along the roster are piling up. They have now become one of the most injured teams in the league. The O-line has injuries to Ronnie Stanley at left tackle, and center Tyler Linderbaum is also questionable. The defense has injuries as well in the secondary, with Trayvon Mullen and Marcus Williams out, and Marlon Humphrey questionable. Cincinnati manages 6 first downs and 142 total yards of offense as they lost their Week 1 game to Cleveland 24-3. Probably almost no team looked worse than Cincinnati in that first week. They also allowed 206 rushing yards. This could be good news for the Ravens and Lamar Jackson if they decide to focus on the run. However, like I said, they are out J.K. Dobbins already from the run game. But the Bengals were 6-1 at home last season. They looked awful in Week 1, but Joe Burrow did miss the entire preseason with a calf injury, and surely they and he will rebound in Week 2. I mean, surely they can't possibly play any worse. These teams played 3 times last season, with the home team winning all 3 games. Baltimore won at 19-17, and Cincinnati won 27-16 in the regular season. Cincinnati then won again in the playoffs at home 24-17. Cincinnati's also won 4 of the past 5. Now, oddly, this is the 3rd straight home game where Cincinnati will be hosting Baltimore. They played them in Week 18, in the playoffs, and now Week 2. I just think there's too many injuries on the Baltimore side right now. Cincinnati have the home field. They should bounce back, and I think Cincinnati probably does get this win. You could probably just bet them by themselves to win ATS straight up. Like I said, try to make this very simple in case, who knows? Maybe Burrow's hasn't shaken the rust off yet. I bet Cincinnati all the way up as an alternate spread at plus 7.5, but you could also go plus 3.5 or plus 4.5 and get a little bit better value there. So we'll start this off with Cincy at plus 7.5. Moving along, Chiefs and the Jags. These are the top offenses from last year. They meet here with KC, who ranked 1st in points per game at 29.2, traveling to Jacksonville, who ranked 9th with 23.9 points per game. These teams, they met twice last season. First was in the regular season in KC, where the Chiefs won 27-17. Trevor Lawrence threw 2 passing touchdowns for the Jags, and Patrick Mahomes had 4 for the Chiefs. They met again in the divisional round of the playoffs, again in Kansas City, and again played to a similar score, with KC winning 27-20. Lawrence had 1 passing touchdown, while Mahomes had 2, and Chad Henne, in limited duty after Mahomes' injury, also threw for 1. The Chiefs got some extra rest here this week, having been one of the teams involved in the season opener. They kicked off on Thursday last week, but they lost at home 21-20 to Detroit. Meanwhile, Jacksonville went into Indianapolis and beat rookie QB Anthony Richardson and the Colts 31-22. The Lions offense against KC, they were clicking in Week 1. They had more total yards, more passing yards, rushing yards, 4th down conversions, first downs, total plays, as well as time of possession. The Jags, they also dominated the stat categories versus the Colts, but they still did allow 21 points to a rookie quarterback. Mahomes last week was without his main target, Travis Kelce, but it looks like Kelce should be back, at least in some capacity, this week. Now, with or without Kelce, it does look like he will be playing. Mahomes, despite having no other reliable targets to look to, he usually can always create something out of nothing, in case he rarely fails to score at least 2 touchdowns in a game. If the Colts can hang 21 points on the Jags last week, so too can Kansas City, obviously. But at home, with double revenge on their minds, I think Jacksonville can get some points as well here, as they have plenty of offensive weapons and have looked strong down the stretch last season and to start this season. I think we see at least 2 touchdowns from both teams, so let's go both teams over 1.5 touchdowns as the second leg of this parlay. Next up, it's Chargers and Titans. These teams were involved in very different types of games in Week 1. They both lost, but the Chargers lost in a shootout, 36-34 to Miami, while Tennessee lost a close 16-15 contest with New Orleans. Now, while the Tennessee game was close, New Orleans QB Derek Carr, he still threw for 305 yards, and Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed had big days with 112 and 89 yards, respectively, for each of them. That should be music to the ears of Justin Herbert going up against the Titans secondary that ranked 32nd in passing yards allowed last season. Furthermore, both Amani Hooker and Christian Fulton are set to miss Week 2 with injuries in the secondary for the Titans. Austin Eckler may be questionable for the Chargers, but they have enough in the offense to still put up some points. Now, neither of these teams are very consistent, but what is consistent is bets on both teams to score at least 10 points, which is a prop you can find at some books, at least at Bet365. They have different categories, both to score 10, 15, 20, 25, etc. So that lowest category is both to score 10. It happened in all but one Charger game last year, and that one game where it didn't, the Chargers won 20-3 over the Colts, so they themselves did score at least 10 in every game. Now, it also happened in all but one Tennessee game last season, with both teams scoring at least 10 in their 17 games, and they lost 41-7 against the Bills. I think both teams should easily get 10 points here. I'm going to round out this parlay with the fourth leg, and it's Seahawks and Lions. Stock has never been higher on the Lions right now after they beat the champs, KC, on opening night. Stock has never been lower on the Seahawks right now as they got stomped 30-13 at home versus the Rams, a team who had little expectations this season and was playing without star wide receiver Cooper Kupp. For Detroit, they were 5th in points per game last year at 26.6, while Seattle were 10th at 23.9. Defensively, Detroit was 28th in points per game allowed at 25.1, while Seattle was 25th, allowing 24.6. So you can see both teams usually scored and allowed well over 20 points last season. These teams played last season, and it erupted into a 48-45 win for Seattle. And the meeting before was also 51-29 for Seattle. Now, that much scoring was probably likely hard to replicate this time around, but I do think we could easily see a couple touchdowns from both teams. That poor showing, though, against LA does give me a little concern for Seattle. So let's just go. You can create a same-game parlay at Bet365 and go Detroit, 2 touchdowns, over 1.5 touchdowns, and Seattle simply to score 1 touchdown as a same-game parlay, and Bet365 will allow you to combine all of these together to have Seattle 1 touchdown, Detroit 2 touchdowns, as one same-game parlay with LA and Tennessee both to score 10, Jacksonville and KC both to score 2 touchdowns, and Cincinnati on that alternate spread of plus 7.5 points. Now, that won't give you big, juicy odds, but it does come in at minus 108 odds, and it looks like a pretty simple bet that hopefully will cash. Let's move along to one more parlay. This one only has 3 legs, and we're going to target a couple of the big favorites here. It's the 49ers and the Rams. These were 2 of the most impressive teams from Week 1. Now, both blew their opponents out of their buildings, with San Fran winning 30-7 in Pittsburgh and LA winning 30-13 in Seattle. Now, there's an odd storyline this week that sees this as being the first time that Mr. Irrelevant, this year that being Brock Purdy, being the last player drafted in a draft, is playing against a former number 1 overall pick in Matthew Stafford, and that's the first time that's happened in an NFL game. Purdy is still undefeated in every game he started and finished, and he has thrown for 2 or more touchdowns in every regular season game. 49ers have had tons of success versus the Rams recently. They won 31-14 and 24-9 last year, and they won 8 of 9 of the past meetings. You can also add in that Stafford is just 1-7 versus San Fran himself personally. Now, Stafford didn't throw any touchdowns last week, and without Cooper Kupp, that perhaps might have been expected. He did, though, throw for 334 yards, and both Atwell and Nakao finished with 119 yards. However, Nakao is questionable, though, this week with an oblique injury. The 49ers, they only have 1 loss in their past 14 games now, and that was in the NFC Championship game against the Eagles, and that was where Purdy got knocked out in that game. Before that, that was also against the Chiefs last October. So the only 2 times in those last 14 games where they've lost were against the Super Bowl champs and the Super Bowl runners-up. The Rams are nowhere near the quality of those teams. It should be a San Fran win. Next is the Jets and the Cowboys. The Cowboys are huge favorites at home. I don't think this game requires a ton of analysis for anybody who watched Monday Night Football. We've seen the Jets just lose their star off-season acquisition in Aaron Rodgers at quarterback. Now, both teams here have strong defenses. The Jets were 2nd in points per game last year, points per game allowed, and at 18.6, and Dallas was 6th, allowing just 19.7. Both defenses look good in week 1. Dallas rolled the Giants 40-0, and the Jets beat Buffalo 22-16 in overtime. The difference here is that both teams don't have a starting quarterback anymore. Dak Prescott was only average last year for Dallas, but he still threw 23 touchdowns and a QBR of 91.1. Zach Wilson steps up now in Aaron Rodgers' absence. He was supposed to be on the bench this year with Rodgers starting, but unfortunately those plans obviously lasted only 4 plays as A-Rod went down with an Achilles injury on Monday Night Football. So it's back to Wilson, who had 6 touchdowns and 7 interceptions last year and a QBR of just 72.8. The Jets' offense last year was 25th in total yards per game. Yes, the Jets got the win in week 1, but Buffalo also turned the ball over on 4 different times. Now the Jets, off a hugely emotional win and also an emotional letdown, losing Rodgers, they travel to Dallas on a short week, and that's probably not going to be a recipe for success. Jets running back Breece Hall, he had 127 yards last week, but he has been limited in practice with a knee injury this week. The O-line for the Jets was already a concern heading into this season. It was one of their weak spots, and now Dwayne Brown and Mekhi Becton are also questionable heading into the weekend. The Cowboys, they had the 3rd most sacks last year, so they should be in Wilson's face all night this weekend. The Jets' D is solid, and if Wilson doesn't turn the ball over and he looks completely different from the player that he was last year and in backup to Rodgers last week, well, perhaps the Jets could maybe keep this close, cover, maybe pull an upset if the defense can create some pick sixes, and maybe they get the win. But that's a lot of ifs, and it's too many ifs for me. Basically, I just don't trust Wilson here going into Dallas on a short week with Dallas having the whole week to prepare for him now. Let's go Dallas win as they should, as they are big 8 or 9 point favorites here, it looks like. And the third leg of this parlay, I'm going to go to Sunday Night Football, and it's the Dolphins and the Patriots. I've been wobbling on this one a little bit all week. Miami looked amazing in week 1, obviously, but it was the Chargers. Still, Tua, he had 466 yards and 2 touchdowns, with 215 of those yards, and both of those touchdowns going to Tyreek Hill. Those 466 passing yards were also the 4th most in a season opener ever in NFL history. Still, Miami gave up 34 points, over 400 yards of total offense, and they got gashed on the ground for 234 yards. Eckler had 117 rushing yards and 47 receiving yards. So it could be a big day for Ramondre Stevenson and Zeke Elliott for the Pats if you were looking at different player props for rushing or rushing and receiving. Now the Pats lost in week 1, but they only lost 25-20 to the Eagles. They did, though, hold Philadelphia to more 3-and-outs in a row than Philly had in any game last year. Now, Tyreek Hill also hasn't had 100 or more yards against the Pats in any of his past 5 games. And then you can look at a positive though stat for Miami. Miami is 5-0 ATS versus New England recently. They've also won 4 of those past 5. Tua is also undefeated against the Patriots in his career at 4-0. And New England, though, they haven't started the season 0-2 since 2001. But they also have cluster O-line injuries to deal with this week. All 5 offensive linemen were listed as questionable during the week. And even on Friday night, 3 of them are still listed that way, with Brown, Strange, and Onwenu still questionable right now. I think you could probably do a teaser here on either of these teams either way. Obviously, New England would offer more value being the underdog right now at home, and Miami, you'd be teasing through a 0, which is not ideal, but it's not really the way I like to look at it. I think if you think Miami wins, or if you think New England can win, but just by a small amount, then why not tease Miami? You could take either of these teams either as an underdog or a bigger underdog. But for me, I'm going to settle on both teams to score 10 or more points in this game. Like I said, is a prop available at Bet365. It's hard to see Miami not scoring 10 or more after that Week 1 performance, and only 2 times last season did they keep a team under 10 points themselves. One was actually against New England, but they were at home in that game, and it was way back in Week 1, and the other was a home game against the Jets, who have no offense at all. But in New England, later in the season, Miami did lose 23-21. I think we should easily be able to see both teams getting 10 or more points here on Sunday Night Football. So if we tally all that up, we've got a San Fran win, a Dallas win, and New England and Miami both to score 10 or more points. That's minus 132 in the parlay. Now, this week we have 2 Monday Night Football games. And while I haven't made any bets on them, let's just go through a few thoughts on those games as they're a little bit further away. And it will be an exciting Monday night with 2 different games. So the first one is the Saints and the Panthers. The Panthers won both games last season, 22-7 at home and 10-6 in New Orleans. But this is a different Panthers team with the rookie QB and Bryce Young, who just threw 146 yards for 20 of 38 passing, with 1 touchdown and 2 INTs in a 24-10 loss in his debut. The Panthers also lost a fumble, so they ended up losing the turnover battle 3-0 in that game. Now, this was despite facing a quarterback who performed even worse. Desmond Ridder for Atlanta was just 15 of 18 for 115 yards and 1 touchdown. It was a narrow win for Derek Carr and his new team, the New Orleans Saints, last week, but they prevailed at home over Tennessee 16-15. Carr, he only had 1 touchdown and 1 INT, but he did throw for 305 yards, and the New Orleans Saints defense picked off Ryan Tannehill 3 times, limited him to 198 passing yards, and Derrick Henry to just 63 rushing yards. Carolina has some injury concerns this week with tight end DJ Clark, right tackle Taylor Moton questionable, as well as cornerback J.C. Horn, who is doubtful. I think the Saints actually could win this game, even though they're on the road, but even if you don't think they win, I don't think they will lose this game by much. I think you could go for a Saints win. I think you could also tease them, turn them into an underdog if you want to do that in a parlay as well. So those are a couple options I haven't quite decided on yet. And the second game is the Browns and the Steelers, another AFC North rivalry. Now, one of these teams looked amazing in Week 1 as the Browns won 24-3 over Cincinnati, and one of these teams looked terrible in Week 1 with Pittsburgh losing 30-7 versus San Francisco. So naturally, the Browns have become road favorites on Monday Night Football by about 1.5 points. This is actually the first time Cleveland has been favored when playing in Pittsburgh since 1989. It's a place where they are actually an abysmal 1-19 straight up. Home teams won both games last year, and home teams are 8-2-0 in the past 10. Now let's get into a ton of stats here about Pittsburgh and Mike Tomlin specifically. Now, last year at home, Pittsburgh lost 4 games, but those 4 home losses were only by 3, 4, 7, and 2 points. And while these Mike Tomlin trends didn't pan out last week, as Pittsburgh was an underdog that week as well, Tomlin as a home dog has typically been money. He's now 13-6-2 ATS, 12-9 straight up as a home underdog in the regular season. Overall, Tomlin was 48-29-3 ATS, 40-40 straight up as an underdog. Tomlin off a loss of 10 or more points, which is what happened in the first week. He also boasted an impressive record in that situation, being 15-5 ATS as well. The Steelers, they look like a prime candidate for a teaser this week as a short home dog, and they actually could possibly win outright as well. So those are a few Monday Night Football thoughts. Let's recap the 2 parlays, and the first one is Cincinnati plus 7.5, KC Jacksonville both to score 2 touchdowns, the Chargers and the Titans both to score 10 or more, Seattle to score at least 1 touchdown with Detroit to score at least 2, coming in at minus 108, and the second one being a San Francisco win, a Dallas win, and Miami and New England both to score at least 10 points. So there you go. Be sure to drop me your NFL Week 2 picks in the comments below, and best of luck, everybody, with all of your NFL best bets this weekend.